If you're a fighting game fan in this era, then you're eating pretty damn good. Especially if you love Capcom. Street Fighter 6 is such a big success, and on the retro side, Capcom has finally opened the vault and re-released some of their most beloved games, from Darkstalkers to Marvel, and now recently with SNK. Not to mention a handful of cult classics and obscure titles to round out these collections. Pretty much everything you can ask for is now available in your home on just about anything. And yet, Capcom has expressed interest in porting more of their legacy titles on modern hardware. That, and they're calling the Fighting Collection games a series, so there's clearly more coming one day in the future, but what would go on it? Quite a bit, actually. So much so that you could probably make a third or fourth collection. Okay, so what are the games? There are over a dozen fighting games that haven't been put on a collection yet. So let's briefly run through them and try to predict what might come in a third fighting collection. Alright, so let's get the obvious shit out of the way first. These games shouldn't have any trouble being on another collection. Street Fighter EX and EX2, Capcom's first attempts at bringing Street Fighter into 3D. It wasn't made by Capcom themselves, but from a company called Arika. If that name sounds familiar, they made Fighting EX Layer and Mega Man Network Transmission. It plays fast and loose with the Street Fighter formula, but it's a fun time regardless. Rival Schools and Star Gladiator, more of Capcom's 3D early efforts. I'm not sure why they didn't put this on the second collection instead of Capcom Fighting Evolution, but here we are. I think it has something to do with these collections having only a set number of games to them. At least 7 apiece, so maybe that's why? I don't know. Tech Romancer is the last holdout from Dreamcast. It's a fighting game with a whole roster based on different styles of mecha anime. I was halfway expecting it to make it into the second collection since everything on there has been on the Dreamcast in one form or another. To have it here would finally put Capcom's Dreamcast stuff on modern hardware. Mostly. Final Fight Revenge. Look, it's not the most polished fighter in Capcom's camp, but it seems to be janky in the fun way and not in the Capcom Fighting Evolution shitshow way. This thing is probably one of the most rare and obscure fighting games on this list, as it never got ported on anything other than the Japanese Saturn. Having this on there would be worth the price of admission for me. Cannon Spike. It's another obscure Dreamcast Capcom game, but it's a top-down shooter. You have a handful of playable characters alongside some original ones, and then you just run and gun. The first two collections had at least one non-fighting game in their lineup, so Cannon Spike would fit right in on with these. Saturday Night Slam Masters, Muscle Bomber Duo, and Slam Masters 2. These are 3 fighting/wrestling games that hit arcades in the early to mid-90s, featuring a bunch of cool wrestling types, including your boy, Mike Ass Hagar. The first game leans more towards a beat-em-up than a regular fighting game, and Muscle Bomber Duo is just an updated re-release of Slam Masters. Slam Masters 2 is closer to a traditional fighting game than the other, but the matches still take place inside of a ring, so it still has a bit of a wrestling twist to it. Next, let's talk about the things that could make it on another collection, but are less likely to do so because of one reason or another. Street Fighter EX3. This is the last EX game in the EX series, and it's the most jank of the 3. The only hurdle keeping this off the collection is the fact that this was never in arcades, and every game in these collections are arcade versions of said games. Street Fighter Alpha 3 Max. It's the most content-rich version of Alpha 3 and is stuck on the PSP. That also means it has the same hurdle as EX3 as there is no arcade version. Sengoku Basara Cross. This one was a fighting game based on Capcom's warrior-style Sengoku Basara series that was really hot during the mid to late 2000s. And if you couldn't tell, it was made by Arc System Works. It's got an arcade release, but it never got translated to English, and it wasn't made by Capcom. Yeah, the EX games weren't either, but Capcom has collaborated with them before on different projects, and they practically own joint custody of Skullomania. Arc System was a one-and-done thing. Capcom could get it on there, but it might take some legwork. Street Fighter the movie. This one has a different problem: the rights to the actors' likenesses. Unless they made a contract where they wouldn't have to renegotiate with Jean-Claude Van Damme, Kylie, Ming-Na Wen, and Raul Julia's estate and everyone else involved in this thing, it's dead in the water. Even if that wasn't an issue, you still have to decide which version of the game to put on. Obviously, the arcade version would be a shoo-in, but what about the home version? The only way that makes it in is if they ignore the arcade-only rule, and I don't see that happening. Maybe it's for the best. The arcade version is more interesting anyway.
Game over!
Tatsunoko vs. Capcom. Once again, this comes down to an issue of licensing. This game almost didn't make it to the States, and it took a lot of legwork and hand jobs from Capcom to make it happen. The only thing it costed was the removal of some weird-ass genie character named Hakushon Daimao. It's fine though, because we got Yatterman 2, Condor Joe, and fucking Tekkaman Blade instead. The downside is the fact that we only got the home version, and these collections have only ported arcade versions of the game, so that means that Capcom would not only have to bust their ass to get the rights, but also the rights to that goofy ass genie. You know, the thing they couldn't work out the last time? Maybe they could pull it off, seeing it's the last major Versus game they haven't re-released yet. Okay, so these games are least likely to make it out of everything else here on a collection because of rights reasons and that they don't quite fit anything else on the list. Alien vs. Predator. This is quite possibly the best beat-em-up Capcom ever made, and arguably one of the best of all time. And it never got ported to anything other than some weird Capcom home arcade stick thing some years ago. Capcom doesn't have the rights to Alien or Predator, and with both the franchises trying their best not to suck, now the rights might cost more than Capcom is willing to spend on one game. There is a possibility that Capcom could strike a deal since 20th Century Fox is now owned by Disney, and Disney owns Marvel. You see what I'm getting at here? JoJo's Bizarre Adventure. This would be the other Dreamcast game I alluded to earlier. It's often overlooked because it was obscure and it came out way before Data Productions started doing the JoJo anime we all know and love today. It's a solid fighting game that's way better than it had any right to be, and sadly, it remains on Dreamcast. There was an HD port that came out digitally on the 360 and PS3, but it has since been delisted. I didn't get a chance to pick the HD version, so I snagged the Dreamcast copy ages ago. It's great, but it would be also nice to play that bad boy with all the extra bells and whistles of the fighting collection. Steel Ball Run is currently being worked on, so now would be a great time for Capcom to try to strike another deal with Araki. Well, that is everything that Capcom has left to work with. Now it's time for the task of putting all these in a list so they could make it onto a theoretical collection. Since this will be part of the Fighting Collection series, you can expect them to have at least 7 different arcade games on them. Fighting Collection 1 had about 10 games, so let's split the difference to say about 8 games. This feels like the most likely lineup for a third collection. EX1 and EX2 are a no-brainer. Cannon Spike and Tech Romancer are the last 3D Capcom games on Dreamcast that aren't Resident Evil. Final Fight Revenge is rare and expensive and can definitely use a port, and all 3 Slam Master games have never had their arcade versions in one place, and it would also be a unique addition to round out everything else. Let's say they decide to go with home ports of their games anyway. What would the list look like then? Still about the same, but what if we swap in some licensed games? Yeah, that list really didn't change all that much. I just don't see Capcom doing anything with a lot of these. As much as I love Rival Schools, Project Justice is better in every way. Same goes for Star Gladiator and Plasma Sword. Outside of aesthetics, there's not too much reason to go back to the first game. Us getting Alpha 3 Max after having Vanilla 3 on everything, and I mean everything, makes zero sense. If they could have done that, then why would they have bothered with Upper? Street Fighter the movie is whatever. It's more of a curiosity now than anything. Tatsunoko, JoJo, and AVP are the most desired, but those are tied up in licensing, so who knows if the juice is worth the squeeze there. But what if I want to dream? What if they actually figure out a way to bypass all that stuff? What would that collection look like then? Well, that's not happening, but I'm not gonna lose sleep over it though. All in all, I'm pretty happy with everything that we've gotten up to this point. If you told me a year ago we would be getting all this, I would have called bullshit. I feel like anything is possible with Capcom nowadays. Except getting a new Darkstalkers. Darkstalkers are dead.